Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I'm one of your hosts, Derek. With me, the other host of the show, Evan. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
All right. Today, we're going to talk day 5 of creation. Once more, a reminder, our guiding principle here as we look at the creation story is this idea of something moving from chaos to God's order. All right. So, this is Genesis 1:20-23, in which it says, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day." This day regularly paired with the second day of creation, obviously because of the places that these things inhabit, right? The birds, the sky, the waters, or the sea animals, the waters. And it's a characteristic of Near East myths, Mesopotamian myths, that these two are paired together. That's a common thing, the birds and sea creatures, the fish and so on. And I think there's a reason for that, which is so far we've seen these three domains: the waters, the sky, that realm, and then the land, the earth. So these two creatures, or categories of creatures, are inhabiting domains that are not primarily man's domain, right? Especially ancient man. He doesn't have access to the sky, and he has access to the surface of the waters, and as long as he can hold his breath, right? But so naturally, there's an element of mystery around these creatures. There's a way in which they are more distant from man, if that makes sense. And so that, again, we're working like out towards man, and that this is in keeping with that pattern, right? We're looking at the creatures that exist, the domains away from man, before we get to, on the last day, the creatures which inhabit the same domain as man. And the word here, so I want to note real quick here, the word tanonym is the word for the sea creatures in this, and that is actually it could be a reference to whales or sharks, but some would make an argument maybe even sea monsters and dragons is actually the way you could translate that word. That is worthwhile as we continue, looking at, again, just ancient man as a whole here. Baal of Canaanite mythology had to defeat a great serpent in terms of his mythology. So this could actually be another way the
To
use
establish
of that
himself
word.
as a god.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so this could be yet another way of declaring God to be above the surrounding gods. He didn't have to defeat a great serpent. He created it. So of course he could defeat it, right? Something like that. So just something worth thinking about, and just some sort of setting establishing nature of these things. So, and any thoughts on that stuff? Or
I think the first one, the idea of that living creatures come to be in places that are out of the reach of humanity first, is very interesting. I'm not exactly sure why that would be. Why would that be the first thing that takes place? Is that in the waters, this element that is of the unknown, and then in the sky, which is this empty expanse that separates the two, that's where living creatures are brought to be, and then the land is occupied. That seems
because in each phase of this, we've worked out in, right? And especially if we look at the 2-day splits that you and I talked about before, right? This act of separation, in each, well, the first 2 days being the act of separation and clearing space, and then the next day being sort of filling that space and creating the rhythms and cycles, and then creating the predictability, being those middle 2 days, and then these last 2 days being about life. In each of those segments, we've worked sort of from what is most distant to man inward, right? And so that would be this case again, right? Work from what's most distant to man inward. And that's just like the pattern of God's creation over and over again, is starting far from man, working towards man, because that way you build up. And at the end, the case we'll make here is that man is the pinnacle of creation. And so you start from what is furthest from man and work in, and that is how you build towards man being the pinnacle.
Interesting. Yeah. That
so
seems reasonable.
If man is the pinnacle of what it means to be a living creature, then you start with the living creatures that are furthest away and work your way towards man at the end. And that's how you sort of put him atop the heap, if you will.
Yeah. This also further, I guess, reestablishes that the land is created with the intention of ultimately man occupying it. And beasts too, but and livestock and other animals, but because I mean, it's being shown here that in those empty spaces that were the sky and the waters that existed apparently before everything, there could have been life.
Right.
That could have occupied that, but that's not what's ultimately done. Is that land is created in order to establish humanity on top of it.
Yeah, and we could argue actually that the point of that, the point of putting life after that, is that first you have to have the space for life, obviously, which we see created in day 1 and 2, and then you also need, like, there is no life that can survive without the predictability that God creates on days 3 and 4. Like, you need that predictability before you can have any life. So that's why the waters aren't filled with life before this day, because the work of day 3 and the work of day 4 needed to happen first. You need that sense of rhythm. So God's order, I think, very much has an order to the order, right? There's God's design is God's order, and there's a design to the way that was designed. These things must happen bit by bit first, and in a sense, because what comes later is dependent upon that which comes before. So life then is dependent upon that predictability that's created on days 3 and 4.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think that what you just said is of immense significance, that not only is there a structure that's being established, but there is a series of events that is a recipe that's being followed. It's like if you're baking a cake and you put the elements of just maybe like flour in, and then sugar, and then you bake it, and then you put butter on top. It's like, well, that's not going to get the thing that you were expecting if you didn't mix it all in properly and then put an egg on top afterwards. It's like, well, that's not. No, you need to follow the series of events in order to achieve what you're looking to. I don't know if that establishes. It doesn't always establish primacy to those. Maybe actually it does. It establishes primacy to those things. It doesn't establish more importance to those things. Because if we're talking about humanity being the pinnacle, well, the pinnacle is just the top, but the other things are the base of it.
Yeah, it's
so what is more important, the top of the mountain or the base of the mountain? And I don't think either one could be deemed more important. But some bear the weight of the other. Yeah,
I mean, in an argument, you could make an argument the base exists in order to support the top, right?
To serve the purpose of the top.
The pyramids, they built the bottom of the pyramid so that they might eventually build the top.
Of getting to the top, exactly.
Yeah, you don't build the top on its own, because then it doesn't mean much. But the bottom itself also wouldn't have meant anything if you didn't create the top at the top, right? And so in a sense, the purpose of the pyramid was to have the bottom of the pyramid was to have the top of the pyramid. I suppose if there was a way to have, the metaphorical top of the pyramid without building the bottom of the pyramid, then perhaps they would have done so, right? but you build the foundation so that you might build that which goes on top of the foundation.
Goes up to the top of it. Yeah, exactly.
If there was a way to make it foundationless, you would, but you just, reality is what it is, and you need the foundation, and that's what this is actually describing, right? These foundations are necessary for life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's pretty profound. Is that even in the creating of this? Again, it could have just been, this is, well, I mean, it's said in the first sentence, God created the heavens and the earth, but it's, there is more significance to the fact that it's outlined as a story, and that even God has to create this foundation in order to build on one thing, and then even more so, what does it communicate to us? What do we learn from what is fundamental to our existence here on earth, based on the way God established it? That's pretty significant, because then we can look around our world and say, what are the fundamental things for me to navigate this world? And predictability seems to be a big part of it.
Very much so.
Because even in here, I want to take one note of that: the living creatures, sea creatures, and birds are both reproducing according to their kinds as well, which is what we saw with plants. With the plants,
we see that repeated. Very much so. Okay, so I want to jump to the end, and then we're actually going to come back to the idea of these creatures in a minute. But first, I want to talk here a bit about God's blessing. We see God's blessing put upon these creatures. Now, it's the first time we see that. And we'll look at this idea more closely when we get to when a similar blessing is given to humanity. But here I just want to look at a general premise of it. And I find it very interesting that this blessing is a command. And that's very interesting to me. I suppose I should probably read it again for the sake of people being aware. Oh, you got it open? Okay, good.
Yeah. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth."
Yeah. So it's a command. It's a command to continue and perpetuate this sort of this creative process that God's established. But
I mean, what does the word blessing mean? A lot. I mean, blessing can mean have a couple of different meanings. But if you're wanting to go with someone's blessing, what you're saying is I have an intention and desire, and to be blessed, to go with somebody's blessing, is them saying, I want you to do that as well. Like that is what I intend you to do as well.
Right.
Or that is a good thing. And so it is typically, if you're asking for someone's blessing in regards to something, it's not just asking for someone's permission, because there's a way in which you could do it regardless. But it is asking for someone's
condonement,
someone's desire, and desire for you to do it as well. And so receiving somebody's blessing is in that way. So the idea of be fruitful and multiply, I mean, it's something instinctually that is wanted to be done. And God saying, blessing it is saying that.
Agreed. Although, I mean, we also refer to blessings as, things we receive as well, too, and say we're blessed. So it's both things. But this to me is, it's like it's a command to do certain work, like this is the work that I have for you creatures, is to go and fill the earth, right? And that is interesting to me, because we don't usually think of it as a blessing to be given a task, right? Here's a task, that's your blessing. We don't normally think of that. And certainly when we see blessings of the firstborn, as we'll go on here in the Old Testament stuff, it's not usually characterized by a chore or a task to do or something you must accomplish. But this is that. And that to me is interesting. But I think actually revealing and makes a lot of sense. Because if we think about it, this is the God creator, designer of the universe, asking parts of his creation, or commanding them, to participate in that creative process with him. And when you look at that, it's it's God creating his creation in a way where it's like, this task, this duty of yours aligns with my creation. And so it becomes participation with the creator in perpetuating this ordering process, right? And to me, if you look at it that way and really see God as that, as creator, designer of everything, I think it, if that is not a blessing, I don't know what is. I mean, I think that's incredible. To be given that duty or that task, it is actually a blessing akin unto receiving some sort of gift, right? Or receiving some sort of, firstborn type blessing, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, the opportunity for engagement.
Yeah, it's almost where those two definitions and two ideas meet is in this blessing.
Yeah. This is interesting. I think I agree. And I think it's a moment where you see the God not taking hands off. Yeah, maybe hands off. But almost there's this the stage has been set and now the play is beginning to take place. Where it's go be fruitful and multiply, and not every step is directed now. Right. We saw the establishment of land, the separating. These are all active things, but now something is created. It's interesting that plants don't receive this directive, this blessing.
Yeah, they can do no else.
Yes, the seed creates something. Yeah. But this is a direction to go and engage and interact with things and stuff like that. So this is, I don't know, this feels like a turning point in the creative steps in which God is turning over the interaction with creation from himself to the things that have created interacting with each other.
It's like God easing off the gas pedal almost, in a way,
Yeah.
And now trying to create a something which will continue his ordering process, like internally to the system, rather than without external provocation.
Exactly.
So, all right. So, in answering the question, what was brought into order, this day, what is light? It got me thinking that why did God make other living creatures, right? Thinking again with this bara creation, this idea that you carve something out, that you have all these unlimited possibilities to you, and God's carved out this creation. Living creatures is a weird question to me. It's odd. I mean, we can look at it and say, oh, well, we can eat them and they clearly interact with nature. And it's like, yes, I get that other living creatures fit within the fabric of creation as a whole. Obviously, God wasn't going to create things that didn't fit within the fabric of creation as a whole like that. But why this? Why is creation include this, right? And why are humans not the only living creatures? And there's a word that's used to describe these creatures, which is nephesh. That's the word used. And what exactly that means is tricky, I guess, for translators. But there's an element of like a soul to it, but it's not like the full soul that humans have. It's Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Heiser wrote that book right there, The Unseen Realm. He describes it as soulish is the best way to sort of think of the word. Soulish creatures. So not human, but kind of like human.
Yeah.
And so this is something I've sort of thought about and pondered for a while. And recently, one of my dogs, Kirby, had to be put down. And it was in the process of him dying and sort of grieving through that I had sort of some revelation about this. Because, when something like that happens and your dog dies, you think lots of different questions about it, right? Including the idea of there being, pain associated with that, and it being like, well, why do I go through this then? Why I have another dog, he'll die, I'll feel that pain again. I'm gonna get another dog after this one and another dog after that one, and I'm gonna probably have two dogs for most of my life at least. And so it why are you submitting to that pain? Like when you get a dog, you know you're going to deal with the pain of them dying before you. Odds are, right? I mean, in most cases, that's probably the case. Unless something unfortunate happens to me, I'm going to outlive this dog. And that is why we do that. Just brought a lot of thoughts to my mind about, wait a minute, why did God create animals, right? Why did God create animals that we do domesticate and go through this process with? That's weird. That's interesting. It's strange. And what I came to sort of think of and realize is that there are living beings of different orders, and this is actually an older concept that we understand, that there is that which is higher and that which is lower, right? And on this scale, animals are lower than humans, but humans are lower than God. And so it got me realizing that, in a sense, what man is to animals, God is to man, in this sense of being at different orders and at different levels. And I would argue, of course, the gap between God and man is greater, right? But man to animal, that relationship gives us a window into how God feels about us. And remember, we've talked about this idea of creation being God's way of expressing himself to us. God's way of revealing himself to us is through the process of creation. And I think we've talked about on this show before, but if not, I'll say it again for the first time or reiterate it here. I think we've talked about why do humans create? Why do we have the ability to create?
Yes.
And
we talked about that.
Yeah, and the idea that, well, we create so that we might in some small way have an understanding of what it is for God to create. And it gives us a window into who he is because of that. So I see actually animals as another way of doing this, another way of God giving us a window into who he is and how he sees us. And in a way, our different relationships with different animals gives us a little bit of a window into the different ways in which God sees humans too. And so with something like a dog and a dog dying and all that goes along with that, you get a window into the way God grieves a human life, you know, and grieves the sadness of that. You know, and then one could argue, I don't know, with a spider, we get a window into God, how God wishes to squash all that is terrible about humanity. So
known some spidery humans before.
Exactly. So yeah, so that is what I really see here, is that it is through animals, and I think this will become of particularly importance when we get to Noah's Ark. Animals exist, again, it's all building to humans, right? Animals exist so that humans might understand their relationship with God through the pale reflection that that the man to animal relationship is involved. And I'll give one small example of this, right? We know that God is beyond our ability to grasp, beyond our understanding, right? But when we talk about God, we anthropomorphize him. We talk about God as though he's just a really advanced human, you know? And in a way, that's what like a dog does with a person. A dog looks at its owner, at its caretaker, and it understands it has a dependency on it, and it understands it can do things that it can't do. But all it sees its owner as is just like a really smart, super powerful dog, right? It doesn't understand that it's a thing beyond it. So it, whatever the dog equivalent, it you know, if you have anthropomorphize, you dogpomorphize, right? That's what a dog
Yeah.
does. You know,
Yeah.
it translates you through its understanding of dog,
Yeah.
because that's the highest order it can comprehend. And so man translates God through man because it's the highest order we can comprehend. And we see
Yeah.
that, we see God fulfilling sort of that limitation in the person of Jesus and saying, I want you to understand as much about me as you can, but I understand that the best you can do is a man. So here's Jesus. Here's my son. Here's the part of the Trinity, all of that.
Yeah, so that's actually fairly accurate to the way that domesticates come about. Because one of the keys to domesticated animals is herd animals.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that is because you what happens is the in the brain of the animal, the human then occupies the position of herd leader,
Mm-hmm.
which would otherwise be occupied by an animal. And so that's
Right.
why if you look around at the most common at the domesticated animals, most of them are herd animals.
Yep.
Cows are herd animals, horses are herd animals, dogs are herd animals. Dogs are really herd animals. And so that's why it's easy for us to domesticate them. The only exception to that is actually cats. And that's why cats are kind of the way they are.
Yeah, I was
than
going to say,
dogs.
it's hard to even call a cat domesticated.
Do cats just willingly live with people?
I think cats are exploitative, right? It's
Yeah, there
like,
we go.
well, you're going to give me this, so I'm going to take advantage of it. But it's not like it's not as
Exactly.
give and take a relationship as it is with a
Exactly.
domesticated animal. With a domesticated animal, it's a yeah, it's a back and forth relationship. With a cat, it's sort of, I'm going to take what you can give me, you know?
Yeah, yeah. But you're
Even
genuinely
a cat petting you, even a cat, you know, a cat lets you pet it. You don't go pet the cat,
pet the
right?
cat. Yeah, the cat
A
doesn't beg
dog,
for
you
it.
go pet the dog, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difference is they but they do so that is interesting that animals do view us in the same way as another animal, almost
Yes.
as a number
Just
as
the
a
super version
dog,
of
as
that. Yep.
another dog.
Mm-hmm.
Well, super version as in that we therefore are considered the pack leader. And that's
Right.
what breaking
Right.
an animal looks like in the technical sense
Right.
is
And we can
convincing
provide
that
them
animal
food,
that
you know?
you are the head.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is, you know, one example or one window into this. And I was thinking about the idea too of, you know, like, well, I wouldn't die to save my dog's life, right? I wouldn't have died to save Kirby's life. But I was thinking about it and I realized if all for sure, if all animals, maybe even if all dogs were going to die, um, if that part of creation were going to be removed and I could sacrifice my life and all of those animals would be saved, or at least some of them, you know, enough to sort of preserve that part of creation that is animalia, the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
like I would
Yeah.
do that. I would sacrifice my life for that. And then I was struck as in realizing, oh, that's the story of Jesus.
Mm.
You know, Jesus dies to save some of that lower order. And that, I mean, that can give us a window into God's perspective on humanity, that it's somewhat similar.
Yeah.
In that sense, you know. So I think there's a lot we can do. Now I should say too, it's not like this perspective has turned me into some, you know, lunatic vegan or whatnot. Because again, thinking about God's order here, right? Everything has their place within the order. And in a sense, some animals are meant to be food. That is, the things of the lower order exist to serve the higher order, right? We exist to serve God, and animals exist to serve us. And the way in which they serve us is food. Sustenance is one of the ways. Now, certain animals are designed for that. Other animals are designed to serve us in different ways, right? And maybe shouldn't overlap in that sense. But yeah, so I look actually at animals that are really truly and obviously designed to be food for humans, ruminants being the main one, cows and such things. I look at it actually more than ever with an attitude of, oh no, I want to eat those things. It's actually letting them serve the thing of the higher order the way they're designed to. But at the same time, I'm even more actually, I suppose, rigid or whatever in my perspective that raising these creatures the right way, not doing the factory farming, doing something like regenerative agriculture where they're raised, properly, is all the more important because of that element within God's design, right? Their place within God's design, and that at the same time as they are, I mean, again, it's a weird thing to say, but we're thinking about, again, beings across these different orders, beings of higher orders and lower orders. Treat the animals the way you want God to treat you. So if you have to be consumed by God, I would assume you would want, at least before that, the best, most consistent with your design life you could have, and not to be shoved into a factory farming process, whatever the equivalent is. And so I see the same thing in animals, right? In a cow, treat it with the care and respect that it deserves as a being serving the higher order, and allow it to live the best life that it can, that is still consistent with that purpose, right? And that's, I think, what we would hope God would do with us, is allow us to live the best life we can that is still consistent with serving his purpose for us.
So I think the thing that you have to do, which I don't know if you can, I don't think you can pull the establishment of different orders from the text.
The only way in which you could is, because we haven't gotten to man being created yet, you could, if you look at the idea of man being created and being something more than these soulish creatures, right? Because these are soulish creatures, and then man is described as the image of God, and that is a level above, right? And so clearly we get to a higher order at that point, and God is obviously above man because he's created man and created all this stuff. So it's at that point, probably in the next day here, day 6, that we really see the establishment of a higher order and a difference in order between man and
maybe
animals.
We should have a lengthy conversation at that point.
We will. But yeah, so man is made in the image of God, and animals are these nephesh, this soulish creatures.
I think we should hold that, though. I think we should hold that till we get to that passage to take a closer look at that. Because the establishment of orders is like, that's a very old idea, and I can see that being repulsive to a lot of people. So I think you want to spend a much longer period of time, longer than we have at the moment, to work through that idea. Because assuming that idea can lead you down the paths that you're going down, but one does have to assume that idea first. It's the same thing that
although I will say
about with establishing that creation is intended for man, that we're building up towards man. That is something that you have to have an assumption in order to, because that's a lens with which you perceive, with which you read these passages.
I don't think so, though. I think people act as if that's true. So even if intellectually they might cringe at this idea that man is an order above everything else, they act as if that's true.
Well,
if given the choice to save a 1-year-old baby or a 1-year-old dog, if one has to die, they're going to save the baby.
Correct. That's a convincing argument for that lens and that perspective.
Yeah.
But you have to realize that that's what then you're taking on. I mean, it's
no, I understand that we're taking it on.
I'm
just saying, whether we admit it's true intellectually or not, we all behave as if it's true. So
yeah, there's
something to that.
There was the thing is people can go off the deep end, and people can behave differently. there was let me give an instance of this, which would
Well,
be
let me just say real quick, we haven't gotten to Adam and Eve yet and the idea of sin, but yes, people can behave differently.
yeah,
right?
of course.
Not acting according to God's design is something people can choose to do. I'm suggesting here that this is the purpose of animal within the intended design, and it seems to me that the majority of us, the overwhelming majority of us, at least recognize the intended design of a man being an order above the rest of soulish creatures.
Yeah.
Not all of us, but the majority of us seem to recognize that fact. Now,
I think there's enough people who wouldn't side with that it's worth spending time on.
Who wouldn't
we should spend on time on them.
Well, hold on. Who wouldn't save the 1-year-old baby versus the 1-year-old dog?
No, that's pretty far off the deep end. But who would contend though with the idea that being in a different order means that the thing is intended for your consumption?
Yes. Okay. That's not actually going to be answered here. That's answered in Noah's Ark, is where that proclamation is made, I guess. Made clear, right? That's where God specifically indicates eat animals, right?
Eat animals, yes.
And so we'll spend a whole episode on that once we get to Noah's Ark, right? We'll definitely return to this. I think Noah's Ark actually is the most instructive story to that end. But just since we're talking creation of animals here, I felt it necessary to at least get the basics of this idea out there. But yes, if I were to do an episode highlighting just this topic, I think you would have to include Noah's Ark, because that's where this is proclaimed most starkly, I guess.
I think that's reasonable.
And all the implications of what it means to be of a different order is proclaimed most clearly there. I don't think it's proclaimed most clearly here, because again, this idea we've talked about before, the maturation of humanity, it's like you had to mature to a certain point before you could really understand what exactly the man to animal relationship signifies. And that doesn't come until we reach Noah's Ark. Humanity doesn't grow and mature to that point until then. So but yeah, so that's the basics, I guess, of why would God make animals, and the reason for that is so that we might know him better, really. Because of the relationship where we are now on the God side of things. Obviously, we're not nearly as powerful compared to animals versus God compared to us. However, that's why God gives us a lot of different ways in which we can understand him. Again, the creation thing, rather than just one. Like this is just another tool in the toolbox of ways we can start to understand and know God better. And you know what? We should pause for a quick moment and mention the very thing I'm saying there actually is probably controversial to some people, because to some people, the only way you can really know God is through what's in the scripture. But I guess I'm making the argument here that scriptures are telling us that you can know God through more ways than just what's in the scripture, if that makes sense. I know that's going to irritate some people, so
irritate people.
We'll go ahead and say we're aware of your irritation, I guess.
If you are irritated, we will tell you our email at the end, and you can send us one.
Absolutely,
we'll address it.
Yes, in time. All right, so wrapping this up, we ask the question again: what has been brought from darkness into the light, from evening into morning on the fifth day? What have we learned about God's order? Each day here, we've gotten sort of a different principle, a different key element, a different, I would say, necessary component of God's order. And so today, in day 5 here, the biggest takeaway, I think, is that order is not a purely mechanical one, right? You have the addition of these creatures, these living creatures who have some ability to choose. They don't just act according to a rhythmic cycle. they have rhythmic cycles, right? There's a nature to these creatures, but then they also have ways in which they might deviate from that cycle, or they have at least, let's say, a window, a range of behaviors in which they might choose, right? A dog's not going to start flying or whatever, but a dog may choose to run or walk or whatever, right? A plant just grows at the speed that it grows, doesn't choose. These soulish creatures have some element of choice to their life. It's not pure following the cycle. So that it stands in contrast, I guess, to what we see in day 4. And so we see that we have these souled creatures with sort of individual personalities to them, and that in a weird way, that is necessary to propel God's order forward, right? Hence the blessing command that is given to them. So we're learning here that God's order, while it has rhythmic cycles, it's not a static order, right? Because even a rhythmic cycle, we might describe that as static, right? If you put on the train and it goes around the track at one speed, that is in a sense static, right? I mean, even static on a TV, when we describe that, it's moving, but it's just following this same pattern, right? And it's not producing anything. So if nature were purely mechanically rhythmic, it would be static. So here we see the introduction of dynamic order, where you have these things that deviate and change from the rhythm and can come into conflict with each other and bump into each other because of these choices. And that's all established here on this day. So it's quite the shakeup. And I think naturally after day 5, when you look at that, you sit there and say, how does this not devolve itself into the chaos, right? That we see at the beginning? How could this ability to choose and all of that not eventually destroy all what's been created up until this point? And that is why we get to a day 6 after this. So a little preview of the solution to that problem coming next time. So with that, be sure to check back in. We'll be back soon with day 6. Subscribe, like, follow, review, posts, and email us your complaints about my suggestion that perhaps we can learn about God from more than the Bible. That's you can hit us up with that at unschooledtheology@protonmail.com. And we'll see you then.